The Transtheoretical Model, or TTM, stands as one of the most influential frameworks for understanding, predicting, and facilitating behavior change across numerous health domains. This teaching script provides a detailed exploration of TTM, examining its theoretical foundations, core constructs, empirical support, practical applications, and future directions. The Transtheoretical Model emerged in the late 1970s and early 1980s through the work of James Prochaska and colleagues at the University of Rhode Island. The model's development was driven by a fundamental recognition. The field of behavior change had fragmented into more than 300 theories of psychotherapy, with different theories often appearing to compete rather than complement one another. The transtheoretical name reflects the model's integrative approach, drawing from across major theories of intervention to create a comprehensive framework. This integration occurred through comparative analysis of leading theories of psychotherapy and behavior change, coupled with studies comparing self-changers to those in professional treatments. A pivotal insight came when Prochaska and DeClemente studied smokers and identified 10 processes of change that were predictive of successful quitting. They discovered these processes originated from diverse theoretical traditions: consciousness raising from the Freudian tradition, contingency management from the Skinnerian tradition, and helping relationships from the Rogerian tradition. Most crucially, researchers observed that people naturally used different processes at different times in their change journey, revealing that behavior change unfolds through a series of stages. This insight fundamentally shifted their research direction and led to the development of the staged model we know today. From its origins in smoking cessation, TTM rapidly expanded to address a broad spectrum of health and mental health behaviors. Substance use, like alcohol and drugs, mental health issues such as anxiety and depression, and violence prevention, including bullying and domestic violence, all became areas where the model was applied. Disease prevention behaviors like cancer screening and HIV prevention, as well as lifestyle behaviors such as diet, exercise, and sun protection, and even treatment adherence like medication compliance, have all been influenced by TTM. Now let's talk about the core constructs of the transtheoretical model. Stages of change is the central organizing construct of TTM, representing behavior change as a process unfolding over time through 6 distinct stages. The first stage is pre-contemplation, where there's no intention to take action within the next 6 months. People in this stage may be uninformed or underinformed about the consequences, may have tried to change previously and become demoralized, and often avoid information about their high-risk behaviors. Traditionally, they've been labeled as resistant or unmotivated. So, in the contemplation stage, a person intends to take action within the next 6 months. They're, becoming more aware of the pros of changing, but at the same time, they're also acutely aware of the cons. This balance between the costs and benefits creates a real sense of ambivalence. People in this stage can experience what we call chronic contemplation or even behavioral procrastination. They're just not quite ready yet for those traditional action-oriented programs. In the preparation stage, the individual intends to take action within the next 30 days. Typically, they've already taken some significant step toward the behavior in the past year. They also have a plan of action, like consulting a counselor, joining a health class, or something similar. These folks are really appropriate candidates for action-oriented interventions. Now, in the action stage, a person has made specific, overt modifications in their lifestyle within the past 6 months. But it's important to remember, not all modifications count as action. The changes have to meet certain criteria to actually reduce risk. For example, when it comes to smoking, only total abstinence counts as action. This is often the most visible stage, but remember, it's just one part of the entire change process. So the maintenance stage is really all about working to prevent relapse after you've made those overt modifications to your behavior. At this point, you'll usually find yourself applying change processes less frequently than you did during the action stage. There's typically a noticeable decrease in temptation and, well, your confidence really starts to grow. This stage can last anywhere from 6 months to about 5 years, depending on the person and the behavior. Termination is that point where there's basically zero temptation and 100% self-efficacy. In other words, there's no return to the old behavior, no matter what your emotional state might be. The new behavior has become automatic, almost second nature. Now, for some behaviors, this may be more of an ideal goal rather than a realistic outcome. And honestly, this stage is less researched compared to the others. Processes of change refer to the covert and overt activities that people use to move through the different stages. These processes are super important because they actually guide intervention programs. Let's break them down a bit. Consciousness raising is about increasing your awareness of the causes, consequences, and possible cures for a problem. Interventions here might include feedback, education, media campaigns, or interpretations. Dramatic relief is about really experiencing and expressing your feelings about problems and their solutions. Things like role-playing, grieving, testimonials, or risk feedback can help here. Self-reevaluation involves assessing how you feel and think about yourself in relation to the problem, using value clarification, healthy role models, or imagery techniques. Environmental reevaluation is about understanding how your behavior impacts your social environment. And interventions could involve empathy training, family interventions, or documentaries. Self-liberation means making a commitment to change and believing in your ability to do so, through resolutions, commitment-enhancing techniques, or providing multiple options. Social liberation focuses on increasing social opportunities that support your behavior change, perhaps through advocacy, policy interventions, or creating supportive environments. Counterconditioning is about substituting healthier behaviors for problem behaviors, using things like relaxation, assertion, desensitization, or positive self-statements. Stimulus control involves removing cues for unhealthy habits and adding prompts for healthier alternatives, maybe through avoidance, environmental reengineering, or joining self-help groups. Contingency management is all about increasing rewards for positive behavior change, using contingency contracts, reinforcements, incentives, or recognition. Finally, helping relationships means utilizing social support for your behavior change efforts, which can include building a therapeutic alliance, counselor calls, buddy systems, or support groups. Decisional balance reflects an individual's weighing of the pros and cons of changing. So this idea was originally based on Janis and Mann's 1977 8-factor model. But research has consistently demonstrated a simpler 2-factor structure. Pros are the perceived advantages of changing behavior, and, on the other hand, cons are the perceived disadvantages of changing behavior. Self-efficacy and temptation. These are two additional constructs that address confidence and situational challenges. Self-efficacy is basically your confidence in your ability to cope with high-risk situations without relapsing. This concept was actually integrated from Bandura's self-efficacy theory. It's important to note that self-efficacy is situation-specific, rather than a general trait. Now, temptation is about the intensity of urges to engage in a specific behavior when you're in difficult situations. It really reflects the converse of self-efficacy. And just so you know, common factors include negative affect, positive social situations, and cravings. There are some critical assumptions of the Transtheoretical Model. 5 fundamental assumptions guide TTM theory, research, and practice. First, no single theory can account for all the complexities of behavior change. Integration across theories is necessary. Second, behavior change is a process unfolding over time through stages, not just a single event. Third, stages are both stable and open to change. Fourth, the majority of at-risk populations are not prepared for action and honestly won't be served by traditional action-oriented programs. And finally, specific processes and principles should be emphasized at specific stages to maximize efficacy. Empirical support for the model comes from looking at stage distribution. Studies of stage distribution provide crucial information for population-based interventions. In United States smoking studies, about 40% of people are in pre-contemplation, another 40% are in contemplation, and less than 20% are in preparation. In countries with less tobacco control, like Germany and China, up to 70% of people are in pre-contemplation. Across 15 health risk behaviors in a sample of 20,000 HMO members, only a small minority were actually ready for action. These findings really confirm the fundamental TTM premise that, action-oriented programs serve only a small portion of at-risk populations. Research across 12 different behaviors confirmed the consistent two-factor structure, pros and cons, of decisional balance. More importantly, systematic relationships were observed between stages and these factors. The cons of changing are higher than the pros for people in pre-contemplation. The pros increase between pre-contemplation and contemplation, while the cons decrease from contemplation to action. So, in 11 out of 12 behaviors, the perceived pros are actually higher than the cons when people reach the action stage. Now this brings us to what are called the strong and weak principles of progress. Researchers have identified some pretty interesting mathematical relationships between decisional balance and how people move through the stages. The strong principle says that making progress from pre-contemplation to action usually involves about 1 standard deviation increase in the pros of making a change. And honestly, this has been confirmed across 48 health behaviors in 120 datasets from 10 different countries. On the other hand, the weak principle tells us that moving from pre-contemplation to action involves about a half standard deviation decrease in the cons of changing. More specifically, it was found to be 0.56 standard deviations in a meta-analysis. So, what does this mean? Well, these principles suggest that, in practice, increasing the perceived benefits of change may actually need to be emphasized twice as much as reducing the perceived barriers. Research has identified some pretty systematic relationships between the stages of change and the processes people use. In those early stages, like pre-contemplation to preparation, there's a much greater reliance on cognitive, affective, and evaluative processes. Things like consciousness raising, dramatic relief, and self-reevaluation. But as people move into the later stages, from action to maintenance, the focus shifts more toward commitments, conditioning, contingencies, environmental controls, and support. When it comes to applying the Transtheoretical Model, there are some key intervention design principles to keep in mind. TTM interventions usually include stage matching, which means tailoring strategies to fit where someone is in the change process. They also often use computer-based expert systems to deliver individualized feedback based on TTM constructs. Another important element is having multiple contacts over time, so people get ongoing support throughout their journey. And of course, providing progress-focused feedback is crucial, reinforcing any forward movement no matter what the action status is. So, smoking cessation actually represents the most extensively researched application area for the Transtheoretical Model, or TTM. And, one of the key aspects here is recruitment. Traditional programs usually reach, well, maybe 5% or even fewer of smokers. But proactive TTM-based programs have achieved recruitment rates of around 80 to 85%. This kind of high participation honestly enables an unprecedented population impact. So, let's talk about retention. Traditional behavior change programs, they usually average around 50% retention. But interestingly, stage-matched interventions actually show higher retention across all stages. And pre-contemplators can be retained at the same high levels as those in preparation. When it comes to progress, stage progress is, well, directly related to your baseline stage. And get this, each stage advancement approximately doubles the likelihood of successful action. So, a reasonable goal for each intervention is just to help participants advance one stage. Now, looking at outcomes, computer-based expert systems have demonstrated long-term abstinence rates of about 22 to 26%. There's also a real consistency of outcomes across diverse populations, like gender, race or ethnicity, age, and education. But there are some exceptions. Older adults show about 35% abstinent, and college graduates 30% abstinent. When it comes to effectiveness with special populations, such as adolescents and patients dealing with depression, the Transtheoretical Model, or TTM, has shown a lot of promise. Multiple behavior change applications have been successfully implemented. For example, in the DISC study involving diabetes patients, there were improvements in smoking habits, diet, and glucose monitoring. Similarly, the Senior Project with older adults led to increases in exercise and fruit and vegetable consumption. The Parent Project demonstrated significant improvements across several behaviors, including smoking, diet, and sun exposure. And in the Primary Care study, there were significant effects noted for smoking, diet, sun exposure, and mammography. Importantly, efficacy rates for individual behaviors within multiple behavior interventions matched those achieved when targeting single behaviors alone. This really suggests that TTM-tailored approaches can effectively enable people to make simultaneous changes without feeling overwhelmed. So, let's talk about the practical implementation of the Transtheoretical Model, or TTM. A systematic approach to putting TTM into practice really includes a few key steps. First up is assessment. The assessment phase is all about identifying the current stage of change. You'll want to measure decisional balance, which means weighing the pros and cons. It's also important to assess self-efficacy and temptation, and of course determine how much the person is using different processes of change. Now, looking at intervention strategies by stage, let's focus on pre-contemplation for a moment. Here, the emphasis should be on consciousness raising and dramatic relief processes. The goal is to help individuals recognize the consequences of their current behavior. We need to validate their experience, while also encouraging openness to new information. And it's really important to avoid action-oriented strategies at this stage, since those can actually create resistance. For contemplation, it's important to facilitate both self-reevaluation and environmental reevaluation. We want to support the exploration of ambivalence and help tip the decisional balance toward change. And building confidence in the ability to change is really key here. When it comes to preparation, the focus should be on self-liberation and building helping relationships. We need to support concrete action planning, identify and address specific barriers, and enhance self-efficacy for those initial actions. For action, it's helpful to emphasize counter-conditioning stimulus control and contingency management. Providing skills training for specific behaviors is essential, and we should work to enhance self-efficacy for maintaining change. Plus, strengthening social support systems can make a big difference. For maintenance, it's important to continue with counter-conditioning and stimulus control. Also, you should develop coping strategies for high-risk situations and, plan for possible setbacks. Most importantly, foster lifestyle changes that really reinforce your new behaviors. Now let's talk about some limitations and challenges. The Transtheoretical Model, like any theoretical framework, does have its limitations. For example, TTM-based interventions have shown mixed results in preventing initial substance use in children. There are also measurement challenges, since the processes of change haven't shown the same consistent measurement structure across studies as, say, the pros and cons have. Cultural adaptability is another question. While the basic relationships between stages and decisional balance have been validated across 10 countries, global applicability still remains an important research question. Also, the 6-month timeframes that are often used may not be optimal for all behaviors. And finally, movement through the stages often involves recycling rather than a strictly linear progression. So let's talk about some recent developments and future directions for the Transtheoretical Model, or TTM. Recent research has really extended TTM in several interesting directions. For instance, there's been integration with other variables, like exploring relationships with resistance processes, framing effects, and even problem severity. We're also seeing advances in digital delivery, with web-based and mobile applications making TTM interventions more accessible than ever before. Tailoring refinements are another area of progress, as researchers develop more sophisticated algorithms for individualized feedback. Cultural adaptations are being explored too, examining how effective TTM is across diverse populations worldwide. And of course, new behavior domains are emerging, with the model being extended to address health challenges and even environmental behaviors that weren't originally considered. Looking ahead, future research priorities are pretty clear. These include examining structural relationships between processes and stages across diverse behavior types and identifying modifications needed for specific behavior categories. There's also a strong interest in comparing the effectiveness of alternative delivery technologies, which is, becoming more important as technology evolves. Developing integrative approaches to multiple behavior change is another key area, as is expanding applications to diverse populations and settings. It's an exciting time for this field, honestly. In conclusion, the Transtheoretical Model really represents a paradigm shift in how we conceptualize behavior change, moving from a traditional action-oriented approach to a stage-based understanding that matches interventions to individual readiness. Its development over more than 4 decades has generated consistent empirical support for its core constructs, while also demonstrating practical effectiveness in addressing critical health behaviors across diverse populations. As health challenges grow increasingly complex, TTM offers a framework that balances theoretical sophistication with practical applicability. And the model continues to evolve, integrating new scientific insights while maintaining its core premise. Effective behavior change requires meeting people where they are and guiding them through a process of change that unfolds over time. All right, let's consider some discussion questions. First, how does the TTM's stage-based approach differ from traditional health behavior interventions? And what are the practical implications of this difference? Next, what evidence supports the effectiveness of TTM-based interventions compared to non-stage-matched approaches? Another question to think about, how might the strong and weak principles regarding pros and cons influence how you design behavior change communications? What are the challenges and opportunities in applying TTM to multiple behavior change? Also, how might cultural factors influence the application of TTM across diverse populations? What technological innovations might enhance the delivery of TTM-based interventions? And finally, how would you integrate TTM with other theoretical frameworks in designing comprehensive behavior change interventions?